Ancient Egypt ran on two scripts almost nobody today can name, and neither of them was hieroglyphs. This is the evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts, and for 3,000 years, the real work of Egyptian writing, the accounts, the letters, the contracts, the literature, the sacred books, was done in fast cursive hands called hieratic and demotic. Hieroglyphs were the monumental display font, reserved for temple walls and royal tombs. The cursive scripts were the lifelines of the pharaohs, the everyday writing that actually held the state together. This is the complete guide to how those scripts were born, transformed, and finally died. From the Old Kingdom to the last flicker of the tradition under Rome. 3,000 years of writing, one continuous thread, and almost none of it looks like the pictures you're imagining. By the end of this, you'll never look at Egyptian hieroglyphs the same way again, because you'll know what the Egyptians were really writing with, and why. Get this history straight, and Egyptian civilization suddenly snaps into focus. People picture an Egyptian scribe painstakingly carving little pictures, but that's a myth born of museum walls. Carving hieroglyphs was slow, ceremonial work. To actually govern a kingdom, you need speed. A hand you can write with a brush. On papyrus, as fast as you can think. That hand was hieratic, and its streamlined descendant was demotic. Track those two scripts across the centuries, and you're really tracking Egyptian administration, religion, law, and literature, and the physical technology of writing itself, changing under the scribe's own hand. And it settles a misconception that trips up almost everyone. Hieratic is not a separate language, and neither is demotic. They're the same Egyptian language you'd find on a temple wall, just written in faster, more abstract handwriting. Picture the gap between a formal printed capital and a doctor's quick scrawl of the same word. That's roughly the distance between a carved hieroglyph and its cursive cousin. Start at the very beginning. Hieratic is essentially as old as hieroglyphs. The two developed side by side in the early dynastic period, before 3000 BCE. The name came much later, from the Greek hieratikos, meaning priestly, a label applied because by Greco-Roman times, the script survived mainly in temple hands. That three-way distinction between hieroglyphic, hieratic, and a popular script was recorded by the early Christian writer Clement of Alexandria. But hieroglyph was never only priestly. From the Old Kingdom on, it was the all-purpose cursive, each sign a simplified, brush-friendly shorthand for a hieroglyph, written with a rush on papyrus and ostraca. Early on, it ran in vertical columns. By the Middle Kingdom, scribes had shifted to horizontal lines, always reading right to left. And unlike hieroglyphs, hieratic never once reversed to run the other way. One more thing to keep straight. Hieratic is not the same as cursive hieroglyphs. Cursive hieroglyphs are simplified, but still recognizable little pictures, used mainly for religious texts. Hieratic is a genuine shorthand, abstract enough that a sign can lose almost all resemblance to the object it started as. That drive toward abstraction is the whole direction of travel in this story. The Middle Kingdom, around 2000 BCE, is hieratic's golden age, the era of the great literary classics and the mathematical texts. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, now in the British Museum, is a second intermediate period copy of a Middle Kingdom original, written in clean hieratic by a scribe named Ahmes around 1550 BCE, and it remains our single best window into Egyptian mathematics. Paired in the scholarly literature with the Moscow mathematical papyrus, its sister document, which together form the core of what we know about Egyptian mathematical thinking. Hieratic also carried the great medical tradition. Texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus, the world's oldest known surgical document, were written in the same cursive hand, showing just how broad hieratic's domain really was. Medicine, mathematics, literature, religion, all moving through the same brushstrokes. By the New Kingdom, scribes were running the script in two distinct registers: a careful, upright bookhand for literature and religious manuscripts, and a quick, looping business hand for administration and accounts. That split, one script pulling toward beauty on one side and raw speed on the other, is the engine that drives the entire later story. Think about what that business hand was doing every single day. inventories, letters, receipts, ration lists, legal complaints, the endless churn of a working state. Sites like Deir el-Medina, the village of the royal tomb builders, have given us thousands of hieratic ostraca, pottery shards and limestone flakes covered in the everyday notes and complaints of ordinary workers, a window into the lives of people who never appeared on a temple wall. The literary book hand could afford to stay elegant and conservative. The administrative hand could not, and it's the administrative hand, always chasing speed, that eventually mutates into something new. Then, in the turbulence after the New Kingdom, the script fractured along geography. In the south, around Thebes, the business hand raced off into a wild, ultra-cursive tangle that scholars now call abnormal hieratic. So abbreviated and compressed it's brutal to read even today. In the north, in the Delta workshops, a different streamlined hand was quietly taking shape. Around 650 BCE, under the 26th dynasty, under Pharaoh Psamtik I, who reunified Egypt from the north, that northern hand spread south, wiped out abnormal hieratic, and hardened into a new nationwide standard, Demotic, from the Greek for popular, the script of the people. Demotic wasn't a fresh invention out of nowhere. It was simply the next, faster chapter in the evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts. This is the pivot that most people never learn, so it's worth stating plainly. Demotic grew directly out of the northern administrative hand of late hieratic. There was no clean break, no committee, no reform decree. A living, working script just kept accelerating in the Delta until it had become distinct enough to count as something new. And then, carried by a reunified state, it became the standard for the whole country. One tradition, one unbroken line, still picking up speed. And then, Demotic exploded. Under the Persians, then the Greek Ptolemies, then Rome, it became the script of daily Egypt. Contracts, tax receipts scratched on potsherds, court records, private letters, wisdom literature, and thick collections of magic and ritual. Its signs are so cursive, so bundled into fixed groups, that most have lost any picture value at all. Demotic is efficiency taken to an extreme. Meanwhile, hieratic didn't die. It retreated into the temples, where priests kept using it for religious manuscripts right alongside Demotic. And a cousin script, cursive hieroglyphs, carried funerary texts like the Book of the Dead down the length of a papyrus roll. 3 cursive traditions all running at once. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt effectively became bilingual on paper. Greek for the new ruler's administration, Demotic for the native population's own contracts and records, the pairing you see frozen forever on the Rosetta Stone, that trilingual decree issued from Memphis in 196 BCE, the very stone that Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion would later use to crack the code of Egyptian writing entirely. For a few centuries, a Demotic contract and a Greek receipt could describe the very same transaction. It was the high water mark of the script, and, quietly, the beginning of its end. 2 forces finally closed the story. First, technology. The Egyptians' soft rush brush gave way, in the Greek era, to the split reed pen, which lays down a thinner, sharper stroke, and the script physically adapted to the new instrument. Second, and fatally, competition. As Greek became the language of government and Christianity swept the country, Egyptians began writing their own language in the Greek alphabet, supplemented by a handful of borrowed Demotic signs for sounds Greek couldn't spell. That hybrid is Coptic, the final form of the Egyptian language. The old cursive hands faded quickly after that. The last dated Demotic text we know of is a graffito scratched into the temple walls at Philae in the 5th century CE, around the year 452. There's a poignant detail in that ending. The very first Coptic experiments show up as tiny Greek letter notes squeezed into the margins of older Egyptian texts, pronunciation glosses to help a reader sound out a word the old script couldn't quite pin down. The future was literally being written in the gaps of the past. Once the whole language could be spelled out clearly in a familiar alphabet, the beautiful, brutal old shorthand had nothing left to defend. So here's the whole arc in a single breath. A brush-written shorthand of hieroglyphs appears at the very dawn of Egyptian history and becomes hieratic, the workhorse cursive for well over 2,000 years. It splits under pressure into the southern dead end of abnormal hieratic and the northern business hand, and out of that northern stream comes Demotic, the racing script of Egypt's last 1,000 years, standardized by Psamtik I, frozen in stone on the Rosetta Stone, and finally outlasted by Coptic. Then a new pen and a new alphabet close the book, and the whole tradition dissolves. That single unbroken thread, brush to reed, column to line, hieratic to demotic, is the real spine of Egyptian writing. Not the carved pictures on the temple facade, but the cursive lifelines the scribes actually held in their hands. That is the evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts. We've walked the whole shape of it here, the birth, the split, the flourishing, and the fade. Next, we lay that same story out as a clean chronological spine, every stage, every date, in order. In the ultimate timeline, evolution of hieratic and demotic scripts.